This episode contains information that will be disturbing to some listeners. As a journalist, sometimes you find yourself in a tricky position where you have a source you know isn't exactly the most credible person out there.
This is Global Tellink. You have a prepaid call from an inmate at the California State Prison, Corcoran.
That's the situation I found myself in, talking to another convicted murderer housed in the same block where Jamie Osuna allegedly beheaded his cellmate.
This was a setup from the jump, and a man lost his life in the most gruesome way I've ever heard of in my life.
But sometimes the people who seem the least credible are the only ones on the inside, in this case, quite literally.
Explain how it is possible, because it's unfathomable to me.
And after Jamie Osuna got a cellmate and was found with the man's mutilated body 24 hours later, some of my seemingly uncredible sources were ready to be heard.
It's the worst thing I've ever seen in my life, and it will haunt me till the day I take my last breath.
I'm Olivia LaVoice. This is The Man with 1,000 Faces. When I've spoken to people I'd consider knowledgeable about Jamie Osuna, about him being accused of killing his cellmate, this is essentially the reaction I've gotten from many.
You weren't really shocked?
Not at all. The idea of Jamie killing somebody else surprises me about as much as the sun coming up tomorrow is going to surprise me. It's just, as long as he's alive, he's going to try to hurt people, try to kill people, and do so in the most sensational way possible.
That's Nick Lackey, the prosecutor on the Yvette Pena murder case that sent Jamie to prison for life. Now, Jamie's family was shocked when they heard the news, but it wasn't so much the murder part that was startling. Jamie's mother, Michelle.
Well, when in the heck did he get a cellmate? When did he get a cellmate? Why, after all this time?
Jamie's half-brother, Kurt, had this to say.
I mean, my first reaction was, how did they end up in the same cell?
And when it came to Jamie's ex-wife, Jane...
Were you surprised to find out that Jamie was given a cellmate?
Very much so. I don't know if that was an accident or what.
And you're not saying that just as someone who knew him. You're saying that...
No, I'm saying that as the Department of Corrections, yeah.
I was particularly interested in Jane's perspective because she didn't just know Jamie. She also spent her career working in various California state prisons. Just a note here, we'll be referring to the prison system in this episode as CDCR and CDC.
Even lay people that don't work in a prison are shocked that he got a cellie. CDC can't take away my retirement, so I'm going to be honest with you. Somebody dropped the ball, big time.
I want to make something clear. A convicted murderer getting a cellmate is not uncommon or unusual. CDCR, the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, is in charge of over 125,000 felons, keeping them and the public safe. And something else significant? CDCR's prisons are designed to hold only about a total of 86,000 inmates. So that should give you an idea of just how overpopulated many California prisons are. Therefore, it's inevitable. Violent felons will be given cellmates. And sometimes an inmate kills another inmate. It's not an everyday occurrence by any means. The homicide rates in California prisons have varied throughout the years. In 2007, 22 inmates were killed by fellow inmates. The next year, that number dropped to 7. 2016 had 26 inmate homicides in prisons across the state. 2017 had 19. When I went to research the 2017 inmate homicides, the information I found showed, for the most part, there isn't really a clear pattern. Most of the cases showed the homicide victims were serving shorter sentences and were in for less serious crimes than the inmates suspected of killing them, but that wasn't always the case. And it was mostly 50-50, with inmates being killed by their cellmate or being killed on a rec yard. What I'm trying to establish here is the concept of an inmate killing another inmate is not unheard of or even particularly shocking. Most of the time, CDCR homicides don't even make the news. But with Jamie Osuna and the murder of his cellmate, Luis Romero, let's just say this seemed different.
I remember thinking, it was just, I don't know, another prison death that they were assigning me to. I knew nothing about Jamie Osuna. I took it as just, another story about a death in a prison.
You're hearing from my colleague, Amber Frias. You may recall I was across the country when I got the news about Jamie Osuna's cellmate. I immediately called my news station and told my boss Osuna was at it again, allegedly. So back at the station, Amber was assigned the story.
Somebody in the newsroom approached me with the story and said that they had heard rumors that it had been very gruesome. It seemed very crazy for it to happen in a prison where this inmate would have been able to have the tools possible to do something like this to someone. It just sounded too crazy.
But eventually, the rumors of the brutality in the case were confirmed to be true. Actually, it was worse than what we thought. Kings County prosecutor Phil Espenshade.
It was a very gruesome case, certainly the most gruesome case I've seen in my career. One of the victim's fingers was severed, part of a body part was cut out, his an eye was removed, and his head was decapitated.
The autopsy of Luis Romero revealed parts of his ribs and his left lung had been removed, and the crime scene photos showed Romero's body had been posed in a way that, if possible, made the full decapitation even more shocking. And Osuna had made a necklace for himself using Romero's body parts. Hearing about the crime scene and seeing it are two different things. After careful consideration, our executive producer, Patricia Rocha, decided she wanted to have the visual of the gore I'd been describing to her throughout this project. Here's Trish.
It's this kind of dark curiosity of, yeah, I want to see it. And then when you actually do, part of you goes, oh, I wish I hadn't seen that. Because you're suddenly shedding light on this thing that no one should ever see. I think there's no other way to describe it than like it looks like a horror movie. You know, it looks like a set. It's almost meticulous in the way that he did it, where he, you know, there is signage, there is his handwriting is very neat and tidy. I think my brain says it's not real. It's not real for my own sanity. But yeah, the blood is hard to ignore.
And of course, another thing about the crime scene that's hard to ignore.
That is a person's organ around another person's neck.
The necklace Osuna made. You might be wondering, how was Osuna able to do all of this? Not just time-wise, but what did he use?
There was a weapon located inside the cell. It looked like it had been manufactured from some sort of razor that may have been issued. It had some string around it, so that's the only weapon that was located.
A razor with some string. Is that all it took? Based on what officers found in his cell, it would appear so. My colleague, Amber Frias.
Honestly, I thought it was crazy that something like this could have happened. I didn't think anything else of it until I did the story and I began to hear from people who have family members in prison who told me that it could have been something more behind it, and who were reaching out to me because they were concerned about what was going on in there.
I too heard from families of inmates housed in the same area of Corcoran State Prison as Jamie Osuna and Luis Romero before Romero was killed. Amber and I compared notes and realized we were hearing from different people who were saying similar things. They thought something was off. But we aren't in the business of conspiracy theories here at Channel 17, or rumors. Not to mention, everything was secondhand information. Until
I heard from a woman whose fiance was in the same unit, the same area.
This woman had an idea, a way we could hear it for ourselves.
So she called him, recorded the phone call between them, letting him know that she was doing this for a reporter just so we could hear what, like, his side of the story. And yeah, it was a very crazy phone call to listen to.
The inmate, who we'll call Billy, had quite the story to tell.
The story goes as following. Last Thursday, while I was on the phone with my wife, an inmate was in the tank next to me who had just got here from Mule Creek Prison. There's an inmate in cell 46 named Osuna. Fast forward to Saturday. Osuna kills his cellie. cuts the head off, takes the eyeballs out of the head, rips open the chest cavity, pulls out the lung, takes off the fingers. They do 30-minute security checks. They pipe your door every 30 minutes. And to make sure you're alive, they look in with the flashlight and everything. Do you know how hard it is to dismember somebody? To that extent? Are you f***ing shitting me? The cops told me it was the worst thing they've ever seen in their life, and it's gonna haunt them till the day they die. Now, let's talk about the guy who killed the cellie, Osuna. He's a straight nut job. Whole face tattooed. He assaults the cops. He throws blood on them. This whole place baffles me. It makes no sense that, number one, somebody signed off on him receiving the cellie. Number two, this was a setup.
Billy's reasoning for thinking this was a setup is this. Luis Romero arrived to Corcoran State Prison on Thursday, March 7th. On the 7th, according to Billy and Billy's fiancé, while Billy was on the phone with his soon-to-be wife, a prison employee came up to Billy, pointed to Luis Romero, and said this.
While I was on the phone with my wife heard me talking to him and told me, hey, tell your buddy Osuna I got that special cellie for him. Don't bitch up.
This recording you hear was from March 10th, the day after the murder was discovered. Billy's fiancé sent it to my colleague Amber 2 days later, on March 12th. Billy's fiancé told me she also reached out to the prison's internal affairs about what Billy says he heard. Now, as with every homicide we report on, we wanted our information to come from officials. I'm very used to having to work around that because I primarily cover unsolved cases. Cops don't usually like to talk about unsolved cases. But with a case where there's a suspect and someone's been charged with the murder, as is the case here, I'm not used to being fully shut down the way we have with the homicide of Luis Romero. We've requested the investigative reports on the case, but they've been sealed by a judge. And prosecutors working on the Romero-Osuna case couldn't tell us anything about why Romero and Osuna ended up as cellmates. Prosecutors explained they don't have that information, and they say their focus is what Osuna did to Romero. They did say they would investigate foul play on the prison's end if they had information foul play existed. They told us so far they haven't gotten any information like that. The officials we've really wanted to speak to are the prison officials themselves. Since the March homicide, reporter Amber Frias and I have asked CDCR officials a series of questions about the case. Amber requested the list of welfare checks done on Romero and Osuna between March 7th through March 9th, the time frame we believe the pair were in a cell together. CDCR officials said those records are exempt from public disclosure. And questions such as why Osuna and Romero were celled together, and asking to confirm that Romero was in fact Osuna's first cellmate since he was admitted to prison in 2017, they've consistently told us that information won't be released. But when I asked if they were investigating any potential misconduct with prison officials in connection to Romero's homicide, they responded, it is under investigation. So throughout my research on the homicide, the only people who've claimed to know anything and were willing to talk to me are not officials. They're inmates and inmates' families. But I'll say this, they seemed genuinely concerned with what had happened and how Osuna and Romero were in that cell in the first place. So, Billy the inmate had our attention, and I wanted to speak with Billy myself. He was a bit less animated with me, but he had a lot to say about Osuna.
I know him really well. I used to talk to him every day. When I was over there in Warren Wright, I was the shower cleaner, and he was next to the shower. And he used to ask me, he's a very calculated guy. Don't believe none of that about, I'm incompetent to stand trial. He's very quiet. He's very calculated. He's very manipulative. He has a lot of friends. He used to ask me, I've been to San Quentin before, and I was in the adjustment center. It's Death Row Shoe. And he used to ask me, hey, what's it like over there? And I would tell him. This is before he did all this. Like, I didn't know he was going to use my information to butcher a guy in the cell.
Did he tell you why he did it?
He wants to go to death row.
Why?
He just thinks it'll be better for him.
What would be
This
better
call
about
and
death
your
row?
telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
I don't know. He's a weirdo. He's got this Joker tattoo on his face, and I guess he's been cutting it with a razor blade to make the scar more profound.
To make his scar more profound?
Yeah. The one he has on his face.
Did he tell you about anything about that?
Everybody sees it. People ask him at yard, hey, what are you doing to your face? He's like, I want to make the scar bigger to look like the Joker. Like, he's an idiot.
So, does Jamie have a cellmate now?
No, they'll never give him another one. The officer said that was the worst thing to ever happen in Corcoran. He never should have been given one to begin with.
Well, I'm surprised he was.
I mean, in my opinion, ma'am, it was a setup. Yeah, it was a setup. He's not liked by the guards in here. And in my professional opinion, and I'm a very smart individual, they thought that the guy was going to go in there and beat up Jamie. And that's not what happened. Jamie was ready. Every inmate in here knew he was going to kill somebody. Every inmate knew. Like, he doesn't hide it, man. There was a pentagram in his cell in blood before he even killed that guy. It was on the floor, drawn in blood. Everybody used to see it. In blood, ma'am. In blood. This was before he got the celly. Like, he plays mind games with the officers. Like, he throws out this persona to them that he's a Satanist. Like, it had 666, pentagram, all kinds of stuff. Man, that's not a secret. That's going to come out in trial because they took pictures of it.
If this was how Jamie had been behaving in prison, it wasn't far from how he'd been during his 6 years he spent in the Kern County Jail waiting to stand trial for the murder of Yvette Pena. Osuna is small, 5'6", and 120 pounds, but jail officials knew how dangerous he was. Sheriff's reports from over the years document his misconduct behind bars and note he was always single-celled. One report from 2012, in which a jail guard caught Jamie with a 5-inch metal shank, says, quote, Osuna is a high-risk inmate, and Osuna is housed in a secured single cell with no inmate contact. The next month, another guard found Osuna with a hatchet-like weapon in his single cell. And a few months after that, despite being single-celled, Osuna found his way into another inmate's cell where an argument ensued. Not long after, Osuna stabbed the other inmate, slashing his face. The inmate had to get 67 stitches. When officers requested to photograph the inmate's injuries, he declined. He said he didn't want to risk Osuna getting copies of the photos and adding them to his collection of trophies. Reports from 2016 also list Osuna as high-risk, staff-assaultive, and an administrative segregated inmate. Jamie's mother, Michelle.
He never had a cellmate. He was a high-risk inmate. He did everything alone.
An investigator for Jamie's defense attorney confirms his mother is right. The investigator says since Jamie's murder arrest and being admitted to prison in 2017, he'd never had a cellmate until Luis Romero. Whether a prison official really said this to Billy the inmate.
Hey, your buddy Osuna, I got that special celly for him. Don't bitch up.
I don't know, and I'm not sure we ever will. Regardless, I have wondered what changed for Osuna to be given a cellmate then, and why Luis Romero? Like Osuna, Romero had spent most of his life behind bars. Romero was born in Guatemala. His family says at age 16, he and his mother came to the States together. His mother was a poor single mom, and the pair moved to Compton, a notorious part of Los Angeles. Within a year of being in America, Luis had joined a gang, and at 17 years old, he shot and killed a woman reportedly associated with his rival gang. The year was 1992, the deadliest year in LA's history. Romero was another statistic, and so was his victim, Maggie Salinas. Romero was convicted of second-degree murder and sent to prison where he'd stay for 27 years. Behind bars, his family says he'd found God. Here's one letter he wrote to one of his sisters. The letter, written in Spanish, will be translated by my colleague.
In everything, God is the light, and we have to go on believing and trusting in Him. God bless you, my sister. Receive my best words. I'm here and I pray to God every night so that He helps you in every possible way. Okay, don't forget about me, please. I really need you to send me regards and the letter. It's like therapy for me. I am so isolated. I just got here and I have not been able to make friends.
This letter was from April 2018 when he was transferred to Mule Creek Prison. That's where family says Luis Romero was doing well until he got in trouble with a guard. He told his family as his punishment he was being sent to Corcoran for 6 months. They never heard from him again. The only call they got from Corcoran was to inform them he'd been killed. About a month after the homicide, I tracked down one of Romero's sisters in Los Angeles and gave her a call. It didn't go as expected. Not at all. His sister was confused why I was calling, so much so that I had to clarify and ask, "Your brother is the Luis Romero who was killed at Corcoran State Prison last month, right?" She said yes, but she still didn't seem to know why a reporter was interested. When I explained, well, I've done stories on Jamie Osuna in the past, she asked, "Who's Jamie Osuna?" It took me a second to process. Before I answered that question, I asked her, "What did the prison tell you about your brother's death?" She said they told her and her mother simply that he'd been killed. She said they assumed there'd been a fight on the yard. She said her brother was a strong man. She figured he'd been attacked by a group of inmates. Frankly, I was surprised. But families grieve differently, and the Romeros are a small religious family. They were devastated by Romero's death, and they never thought to Google it or even really ask questions. They thought they knew what had likely happened, and they felt they just had to accept it. Now, I had to break it to them. It went down a little differently than a prison yard brawl, and that was not an easy conversation. The family took their time to try to process the reality of his death, and spoke to my colleague Amber Frias a few months later, outside the Kings County Courthouse before a hearing for Osuna.
We're here because, for us, Luis, his family, he's more than just another prisoner, another victim of Osuna. He is my mother's son, my brother, and we love him. My brother had been there for many years, and he was eligible for parole soon, and my mother and my sister and I always hoped to see him once back home, but that hope is dead.
The Romero family has a lot of questions. For one, going off their measurements, Romero had about 40 pounds on Osuna. How was Osuna able to overpower him to that extent? And how was he able to allegedly torture Romero, mutilate his body, and decorate the cell in such a horrific, gory manner while avoiding detection? Jamie's ex-wife weighs in on that.
Based on your experience working in prison, are you surprised that Jamie was able to fully decapitate the cellmate and mutilate him the way he did?
That's amazing. They're supposed to be checking the inmates, I believe it's every 15 to 30 minutes on night shift. There's no way he did that in 15 to 30 minutes. If he covered his window, that's a violation. That the officer should have said take it down. Like if he covered his window with a sheet or what have you. There's just so many mistakes that were made. Either they weren't checking or he covered the window and they didn't bother.
But the biggest question for the Romeros is the same one Osuna's relatives have been asking. Why were they put in the cell together?
This makes us feel so helpless. Like, they knew that this is who he is. He likes to kill. And for us, it's very difficult to understand that he was even allowed to be with anyone.
CDC prison officials have told us from day one they can't comment on why Romero and Osuna were housed together. But here's what we know so far. Romero is transferred to Corcoran on March 7th, which just so happened to be Osuna's 31st birthday. Now, CDCR won't confirm this, but Osuna's attorneys and other inmates tell us Romero was sent directly to the SHU, which is the building in which Osuna was housed. By 7:30 a.m. on March 9th, the homicide was discovered. Fellow Corcoran inmate Billy.
This is not right. This man wasn't even in Corcoran SHU for 48 hours and he lost his life.
Again, CDCR won't confirm the SHU is the area in the prison where the homicide happened. Their website explains the SHU, SHU, stands for Security Housing Unit, and prison officials tell us that all inmates are in there as a result of serious misconduct they committed in prison. What Jamie did to be sent there, we aren't sure. But he has been charged with throwing either blood, feces, or urine on guards and having a weapon in 2018. Now, the SHU is essentially the highest security prison can get. Some call it a prison within a prison. Inmates say in the SHU, you're in your cell most of the time. Yard time is very limited, and when you do get to leave the cell, you must be handcuffed at all times, escorted by 2 guards. Basically, it's intense, and it's safe to say none of the inmates there want to be there, especially the particular unit where Jamie and Romero were. And ask any corrections officer. Inmates, especially in the SHU, have nothing but time. So when they file lawsuits or complaints against guards, most will say you should take it with a grain of salt. I wouldn't necessarily disagree, but they shouldn't be ignored either.
Nobody cares because they're already viewed as dangerous level 4 inmates.
This is the sister of an inmate who was housed in the Corcoran SHU in Building 4A, where she says her brother actually saw the crime scene. I'm not sure I'd believe this if she hadn't had details about the scene that were accurate.
He does find it kind of odd, and he does feel like it was a setup. He did state to me that guy, Romero, had just got there. 24 hours hadn't even passed, and he just had arrived to that prison when they put him with Osuna.
She says she's her brother's voice, and these are the concerns she brought to internal affairs at the prison, which she says successfully got her brother moved out of the Corcoran SHU and to another facility.
If an officer doesn't feel like they like you, he did say, they'll just put you with somebody that know that they can hurt you. He had told me that officers there normally put rivals against rivals and that they actually put them together just to cause conflict.
These same concerns were brought to us by several SHU inmates. One inmate wrote a detailed letter about the conditions in the Corcoran SHU and discussed the need for cameras inside the building. The inmate said cameras would keep guards and the inmates safe. CDC confirms there are no cameras in the SHU. Going back to my discussion with an inmate's sister, she ended our conversation by saying something I've also heard several times.
I'm not surprised that this has happened there because that prison is known for that,
Now, I wouldn't say Corcoran is known for COs staging inmate fights, but it has had a bad reputation for it because of incidents from decades ago. In 2000, 8 Corcoran prison guards went on trial, accused of setting up inmate gladiator fights, an issue that was highly publicized at the time. All 8 Corcoran guards were acquitted of all charges. And just 1 year earlier, in 1999, 4 Corcoran COs were put on trial, accused of bribing a notorious inmate in the Corcoran SHU with extra food to be a, quote, inmate enforcer. That inmate, Wayne Robertson, was a notorious prison rapist, and he testified that prison guards told him they were bringing an inmate to his cell who, quote, needed to learn how to do his time. Robertson said the guards knew he'd raped the inmate, which he admitted he did repeatedly. The COs in that case were also acquitted. I think it's important to note here that these accusations are over 20 years old. A lot has changed, not just at Corcoran, but all prisons. But I bring up Corcoran's past because I think it may account for why some could possibly be being overly critical of the prison as it pertains to Osuna and Romero. There's that, well, it's happened there before, it could happen again stigma. I was hoping to be able to clear it up once and for all, to find out what really happened, if there was any malice or negligence involved in selling Romero and Osuna together, or if CDC had genuinely thought the pair were a good fit and selling them together would work out. But 7 months later, we still don't know. But I did do some research and found out in order for an inmate to be given a cellmate, a committee of prison administrators must determine the inmate is fit to have a cellie, and then they find an inmate they think would be a good fit for them. At that point, the committee introduces the two inmates and has them sign forms acknowledging each inmate agrees to be celled together. CDCR officials did confirm for me that that is the process, but they said they couldn't legally say if protocol was followed with housing Romero and Osuna together. And recently, an investigator working for Osuna's defense attorney told me he couldn't find those forms in either Osuna or Romero's prison files. So we don't know if protocol was followed. We don't know how Osuna was able to do the damage to Romero and stage such an elaborate scene. We don't know how he overpowered the larger inmate. We don't know how much time passed between the cell checks by officers. But according to court documents, prosecutors believe Romero was alive to endure severe torture and dismemberment. And while Osuna was moved from Corcoran SHU to another prison after the homicide, recently they moved him back. Fellow SHU inmate Billy said Jamie wasted no time once again getting in trouble.
Just Tuesday, he got busted with a big-ass plexiglass knife.
We've confirmed that, but for the record, Jamie hasn't been charged with any crime related to the incident.
He does have a little celebrity status, I'm not gonna lie. You know, the guys look at him like, man, that dude ate the dude's body, you know, like, he never should have had a cellie. This is what I know for a fact. When he was in New Folsom, he told the ICC, he told the committee, I'm gonna kill the cellie. I'm gonna kill him. Did you know that?
No.
He told them, ma'am, those are going to become, you can subpoena those records. His clinician and ICC people told us that it never should have happened. Guards told us it never should have happened. When he was in New Folsom, he told the committee, I'm going to kill a cellie. Watch, I'm going to kill a cellie.
So why would he get one?
There's a lot to this story that I can't really, I don't want to put out there because I'm waiting to transfer.
I understand,
Once I transfer, I'll lay it all on the line.
Okay.
I'll lay it all on the line. He had been writing 602s against some very, very high-ranking guards here.
Okay. Okay.
Anything else you'd like to know?
Well, I'd love to know a little bit more about 4A. That's the name of the building you're in, right?
Yeah, that, I just can't, ma'am. I don't know what you know that goes on in here, but it's very dangerous. It ain't dangerous because of the inmates, let me tell you that.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded. You have 60 seconds remaining.
Oh, I guess we have to go.
Okay. You have a good day, ma'am.
So for now, there are still more questions than answers. Jamie's defense investigator says he's been given the same information about Jamie making comments at New Folsom Prison that if given a cellmate, he'd kill them. And he says he's working on tracking that down and confirming it. The investigator also had heard the same stories we did about Osuna having conflict with a prison official who'd allegedly made a comment about Romero being a special cellie. He says his team is investigating those claims. We asked CDCR if any employees have or are being investigated for possible negligence or malice in regards to Romero's death, and they tell us that is currently under investigation. Jamie faces the death penalty for the Romero killing. When I saw him in court in late April, Jamie looked like a completely different person. He's always been petite, but this time he looked frail. Yet he still had at least 6 guards surrounding him, ready to pounce if he tried anything funny. His thick black hair had grown very long, all the way down his back, and as he moved with his waif-like figure and dark hair, he looked like an old witch. He was zombie-like. The typically overly animated Jamie Osuna seemed catatonic as he walked into the courtroom, eyes straight ahead. His attorneys are currently fighting to get him out of Corcoran. They think he needs a level of mental health care they say Corcoran can't give him. And as they begin to prepare for the death penalty trial, they say they have over 10,000 pages of information and evidence to go through. It will likely be years before a jury ever hears any evidence and has to decide what to do about Jamie Osuna. In the meantime, Billy the inmate tells us life is already different for Osuna behind prison walls.
Are people scared of him?
No. He's looked down upon because of the crime. None of us knew that, right? Before that stuff came out on TV about the woman and the motel room, none of us knew that.
What do you mean?
Ma'am, none of us knew he was in here for torturing a woman. None of us.
What do you think he was in there for?
We just thought he was in here for murder. When people asked him, hey bro, what are you in prison for? He would say murder, and we'd just leave it at that. Nobody knew. But once that came out on TV, a lot of us were like, what? This dude's a weirdo. He knows that we know now.
Even among other convicted murderers, including Billy himself, Osuna is bad news. Billy says it's simple prison politics. Now that they know Osuna has tortured an innocent woman, Yvette Pena, he's been shunned. Though that's little consolation for Yvette's family, whose wounds were ripped open when they heard the news about Osuna's cellmate. Here's Yvette's sister, Danielle.
When he was sentenced, I thought that was the end of it. So I thought I wouldn't hear about him until I was notified that he was dead. So that evening in March, I read the headline and see his face. I immediately thought he was the one who was killed. And for a brief moment, just a whoosh went through my body of complete closure. He's gone. There's no more Osuna. I was at complete peace. I felt like it was an outer body experience. Like I just felt like my whole soul just shot out of my body and shot back in, and I just felt like an overwhelming peace. And then I read the article and I cried. I lost it. I threw my phone down and I just cried and cried and cried. Mostly because, oh my God, he killed someone again. And then a second was because I felt bad for feeling at peace that he was gone. Because throughout all of this, I don't care what happens to him. I don't wish anything bad on Osuna, and I don't wish anything good on him. And I felt like a horrible human being for those brief 3 seconds that I thought he was dead. I felt like a monster. A million thoughts went through my mind. What ownership did I have in it? In Romero's death? Had we taken it to court and he was found guilty, as I know he would have been, and got the death penalty, this wouldn't have happened. And that was just a brief, quick thought in my head. As soon as it popped in my head, it popped back out, because no, this isn't my fault. This isn't on me. But the thought was definitely there.
Prosecutor Nick Lackey.
I think the only way to solve, based on the publicly available information, my personal opinion is that the only way to solve the problem of Jamie Osuna is to end his life. Making him live in certain accommodations or anything like that, that can maybe mitigate the problem, but any chance he has to hurt somebody else, I think he's going to take it.
Is that really the case? Will Osuna keep trying to take lives from behind bars? Who can say? But in his own way, Jamie himself said something to me in the 2017 jailhouse interview that was something like foreshadowing.
I do unto others what, I expect them to do unto me. For instance, I'm admitting this and telling you this, right? So my inevitable be death row, get the needle. Maybe an inmate might get a hold of me, kill me. I might get a hold of the inmate, he might kill me. Maybe I might get life in prison, life without the possibility of parole and get 100 and something years. I'm still gonna have contact with somebody. The act is still gonna be committed upon me or upon them. I do accept it if they do it to me, what I did to my victims. I do not see that there will be no problem with it.
The act will still be committed upon me or upon them. What will happen next for Osuna? Only time will tell. The Man with 1,000 Faces is written and reported by me, Olivia Lavois. Marisol Maldonado is our editor and sound mixer. Patricia Rocha is our executive producer. Additional reporting for this episode by Jason Katowski and Amber Frias. Michael Trihey is our news director. For photos and bonus content, go to thousandfacespodcast.com. Copyright Nexstar Media Group, Incorporated. If you like this story, please check out another project of ours, one we call Murdered and Forgotten. Our focus is identifying 2 Jane Does, both brutally murdered in 1980. We know who the killer is, but this story isn't over until we know who the victims are and can bring them home to their families. There are so many clues. Please go to murderedandforgotten.com.